theorists tend to look at social movements and then say, ah, let's get a picture here of what motivates these actors. That's you all. You are now reduced to actors, but you are motivated actors. And so I'm just curious, which is why I was asking this board, and I know we don't always talk about values in the 21st century because nobody wants to tell somebody else what to do. However, what are the values that make people either want to join time trade or be part of a time bank? And what are the values that sustain people to do this particular kind of work? So if I'm just interested in a couple of values, if we could just throw out these words, then I can put them here. Yes, sir?
Egalitarianism.
Egalitarianism. Okay, it's okay if I say equality?
Perfect.
All right. It just saves my writing space. Any other values?
Commitment to community.
Community. Great. Emma, you had your hand
Yeah, I was
up.
going to say community.
Community. That one comes up a lot. Yeah, and I know your name, but I forget it. Can you, Mary?
Donna.
Donna. Yeah.
Less consumerism.
Right, okay. And we would, in my trade, we would just call that a critical value in the sense that it is a value that is framed against something else.
Yeah.
That there's a conscious antagonism with something else. And these other two we would call normative values. In the back, what's that?
Service.
Service, great. And next to, in pink, available resources. Available resources. Social movements don't always last. Oftentimes it's because in the very early stages, these values are enough to hold people's attention. And you say, oh, I just want community. And everybody says, oh yeah, I want community too. And when everybody is on that level, everybody gets along. But at a certain point, what does community look like? Or, Emma's presentation got at this point, who is going to keep the community going? And at that point, then it's a little bit different to make the thing keep going. Especially, and this is something so peculiar to human beings, and maybe other species, but I haven't seen it on such a large scale. Human beings tend to say, I think community should look like this, and I don't understand why you're doing that, because that's not part of my community, or not part of my community making. Do you see what I mean about the relationship between political theorists and social activists? Social activists say, come on, let's go. We're all on board. Let's do it. Political theorists say, well, what are you actually agreeing to? And what is going to happen when you no longer agree on everything? And probably more in Brattleboro than other places, who's going to actually do the work since so many people are involved in so many different activities around here? And here's a problem that Brattleboro may not happen, although you can tell me if I'm wrong. Who is going to make people do what needs to be done when they're not doing it? And that's a C word, which is coercive. Who is going to coerce others to do what needs to get done? It's generally a conversation that social movements don't want to have. I used to work for the Women's Crisis Center when it was called the Women's Crisis Center. Everybody agreed that what they wanted was safety. They wanted to make women and children safe. Where we started to fall apart with other members of the battered women's movement is that we weren't in Brattleboro so interested in being deeply tied to the prosecutors and the cops, which meant that the coercion level was far more coming out of the police state than other battered women's groups were interested in. Does that make sense? It was on the coercion level that the network for domestic violence in the state of Vermont in the 90s ran into some trouble because some people were all about getting the police involved because that created safety, and other groups, and that would be the Brattleboro group, said, we don't want that safety with that. But that word safety was making everybody nod their heads for a long time in the battered women's movement. Want to make women safe, want to make women safe. So, I wanted to tell you about 3 political theorists to give you 3 ways of thinking about the problem of how do we deal with these lovely words that we agree on. Because nobody here seemed to say like one of these words was problematic. What do we do when these lovely words we agree on are no longer enough to hold the momentum forward? My guess is you will probably like some of these theorists' solutions and may not like others. However, I offer you all three because at certain times it's very useful to have one of these cards to pull out, and then you can say, oh, well, what would Hobbes do? Or what would St. Augustine do? Or what would Marx do? So those are going to be the three, and I'll just give you a little bit, which means, can people see this? No. Is that all right? Because I would love to make a little space, a little picture here.
Do you want to talk while I make it viewable? Or are you going to do it again? Changing, never mind.
Well,
Just offering my hand in service.
oh, well, which is one of those values. Okay, first picture. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm not that generation, but I can make little pictures. Okay, this is time for St. Augustine. I thought that would be appropriate. This is the time trade. This is time for St. Augustine. Anybody recognize what that picture is?
An hourglass.
An hourglass! Exactly. Time is running out, he tells us. St. Augustine lived in the 4th century. As in our time now, there was crisis going on, crisis of leadership. The Roman Empire is a serious problem. There's all these Christian sects around. And St. Augustine says, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Especially since he, and maybe other people feel this, felt quite strongly that human beings had really screwed things up and the time was running out. St. Augustine is making a comeback with the collapse theorists, right? What's his name, Jared Diamond, or some of these other people who have all the statistics so that we can plan for the next maybe 5 or 6 years and then expect to go crazy. And that's just the picture that St. Augustine had in his head. So time is running out. People are no damn good. However, brilliant man that he was, he came up with this other idea of time, which I just have to make sort of a motion. I would be doing this eternally, of the picture of God. And that God is an energy system that does not dissipate, that is eternal, that is available to us at any moment, and that moves our consciousness from something that was looking downward and falling apart to new possibility. Christians would call that redemption. It can be useful for social activists as well. That there's this moment where you tap into energy. Maybe you will call it community. And that will be, oh, I have enough energy. I can rise up to this occasion. I can stop worrying who's doing what where, and I can just participate. And in that participation, in this effort, I'm going to feel so much more energy than I had 3 minutes ago. But that's a shift in your consciousness. Feeling like, need more help, need more people to sign up, need more people to do what needs to get done, to, whoa, I'm participating in something enormous, eternal, and divine. If you have a religious background, that's useful. Maybe if you tripped during the 60s, you will remember that moment. There are many ways to get at that moment, but that's sort of what we're looking for, right? Down to ding. Okay, so that's the St. Augustine solution. The next solution is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes lived in the 17th century. Oh yeah, here's my picture. Thomas Hobbes lived in a time which was also a crisis where, all those religions, all those people, Catholics, Protestants, everybody was going after each other. The idea of like, my community, I understand my community. Well, my community are people who either genuflect, and if they're not genuflect, then we have to burn them at the stake. So Hobbes looked at people using the term community. It's almost like he was seeing what Augustine had created, where a community was everybody who was like-minded and was tapping into the same eternal source. Hobbes looked at how these people were killing each other. So, Hobbes' picture of time is I don't know if you guys signed contracts for the time trade. Allison and I weren't able to get far enough into the website to see. Hobbes' picture of time is, I promise to do this, and then you will do that. It's a contract. It's why Hobbes is one of the first social contract theorists. People will get along with each other, not because they're all participating in the same revelatory experience, but because they just stick to procedure. You all don't have to have a religious tie to make this work. You just fulfill your obligations. So how do you all, or how does, what's his name, Edward Kahn? Edgar Kahn? How does Edgar Kahn get people to fulfill their obligations? I don't know if anybody, this is what I look for on websites. Where is their coercive force? It was not the Almighty. I noticed that. Augustine would have been the Almighty. But you all, or time trade, their coercive force was if somebody did not do the deed they said they were going to do. I think there was a teenage young man who failed to show up, and people got on his case, and he stole. What?
He stole a cell phone or something.
Yeah, right. Can you just tell that story briefly? Do you want to remember how it went?
That's it. People got on his case. It was returned.
And he felt remorse. Exactly. So the coercive force was not the police. It was just the community holding each other accountable. Hobbes sometimes gets a bad rap because he's very interested in the coercive force. However, maybe we need coercive forces in order for this form of community making to work, which means that everybody has to hold everybody else accountable, unless you bring in the police. Which is harder in Brattleboro, Vermont. That political strategy is often taken up. Does that make sense? So here's a new picture of time. The only way Hobbes says we can have a future is to have contracts that are held up and that somebody is willing to enforce the contract. That's number 2. The third is Karl Marx. And I loved it that one of the early advertisements for this talk was Meg Mott, former communist, of the Brattleboro Reformer. I didn't even know the Brattleboro Reformer had such a position. Had such a position. I would have liked to. So for Marx, the picture of time is that we go along through history, and there's a variety of changes. There's feudal life, agricultural life, industrial life, I'll make some factories up here, and that eventually, through class antagonism, the forces get so big that boom, 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 the whole thing blows up. And many people would say that's where we are right now. That the people who control the modes of production, that's how Marx would talk about it, are trying to stifle the energy of the people. And Emma's presentation about how you had this energy, other people had this energy, you had this experience in Portland, you wanted to energy for this, and the whole economic arrangement of capitalists running the modes of production blow up. I wish I had read. Marx says at a certain time in history, the whole thing's going to blow up. Then what? Not so clear on that. So in terms of what will politics look like after the revolution, he got very Augustinian. He started to say everybody will just be the same and we'll all have the same great love. And it won't be God, it'll be species being, and it'll just be lovely because the capitalists have been blown up and now we can all be truly alive. So social movements tend to believe that they have that capacity too. That they can blow things up and create a new world. And I would say that is a very useful energy to have. However, it's also useful for the day after the revolution to go back to those early questions. Okay, now how do we organize ourselves? And to still have somebody who's willing to judge. We've got to keep our wits about us, even after we've made everything beautiful, to judge what do we need to do for the health of the institution, how are we going to maintain a coercive force, and how can our community be actually something substantive instead of just rhetoric. So that's pretty much. Did everyone hear Suzanne's questions about?
No. Could you repeat it?
Suzanne was asking whether I had any insight about where time trade might be in this level of the evolution, because it sounds like big push. I think Emma used the word burnout, right? That's a cycle that happens. And so what might
There's a little bit of struggle between, I mean, I was going to speak up and say logistics and practicality when you were asking for values, but then it was like, oh, well, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, sort of just the fact that we're trying to juggle both, how to implement and how to maintain the values, and just, I mean, if you could insert any words for us, that would be wonderful.
Right. And did everybody hear how Susanna, right? Almost wrote down, when I was asking for values, logistics and practicality. And then you did it. Do you want to just tell us what made you hold back? Because this is the moment right here where we're trying to figure things out.
Yeah. Well, I held back just because it didn't really seem to fit in with the way the list was going. And I kind of felt like, well, but, and, you know, but I didn't want to be like the negative person who says, oh, how are we going to really do this? How are we going to keep people trading? So I kind of repressed my impulse.
Exactly, because like practicality, like we could be having revolutions or having mind-rapturing experience, and then we have to get down to the practicalities. Yeah. So this is why I am starting to tout Hobbes as a pretty smart guy. He's boring to read. He believes very much in you need to define your terms, and then you hold on to those terms. And you use them in the same way, everybody. You don't say, oh, this person is doing this, using this term, and somebody else is using that same term. Particularly when people are promising to do something. That's going to be a moment, not just for the people plugging into the bank, to be very, very clear on what it is they can do, and what those figuring out what other people's expectations are. And it also seems to be true for the organization as a whole. There's a tendency, particularly on people on the left, to run towards the more vague, to do the head nodding around community, we're all progressives, we live in Vermont, and not to take the time to say, okay, what needs to get done, how much energy is it going to take, and how can we make this thing work in such a way that some people aren't going to head towards burnout. There's a lot of groups around here too. Tim, right? Aren't you Tim?
I was, yeah.
And you're still Tim, right?
Right.
Post-oil solutions.
Until you asked the question. Well,
Yeah. Like, why do you want to know? That's what my mother used to say.
Right,
Are you Meg's mother? Why do you want to know? I wonder, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've noticed with post-oil solutions in terms of how to make it keep going or burnout? Or?
Oh, I think there's a lot of answers that can be given to that. I don't think there's any one thing. We certainly have been blessed with a number of people who have gotten involved with us. I think that the thing that we keep remarking, and we just came from a retreat in which we did a SWOT analysis about ourselves. And one of the things that was said is how we can act spontaneously and creatively, and that we'd like to maintain that in our organization. And sometimes we've had trouble with that because we're a 501c3 and have a board and have all those responsibilities, with feeling our style as being cramped by that. And I feel like being able to act in the moment, being able to suddenly be in a situation that we hadn't planned on, and being able to do something creative and constructive has done well for us, at least over the 8 years so far.
Right. Right, and that's gonna give you the resilience, if you can have that.
Resilient, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, where did that picture go? Is that ready to do this again?
Thank you.
Oh, no. How do you,
No.
how do I make it again? Can I just flip it around? Sorry, I have to go back to my picture. Okay, so, this little moment here is generative force. It would be a term that political theorists might use, of lots and lots of energy. So when Tim is talking about spontaneity, that's an enormously important force. The other force is formative. What holds the spontaneity? And this is, as an organization, can form, hold all that energy. And we're going to get very excited by the energy and think that's super cool, and that form is a drag, just as Susanna was like somewhat reluctant to talk about logistics and practicality. But form makes it possible for all that to happen. So along with spontaneity, I would spend also a lot of excitement about whatever forms you're generating as being part of the whole mix. And that's why the clarity, the getting back at it. Yeah, Tim.
Meg, I would add one other thing to that, is that we've also been a group that has always, loves conversations about what can be done, but at the end of it, we say, what is the next step? What are we doing? And maybe that refers to your form,
Yeah.
because we do believe in action. We don't believe in just emoting great ideas and feelings about what should be done. Someone may come to a meeting and say, we should do this. Well, we don't say, well, what's next? What would you do? What are the, to use Suzanne's term, what are the practical steps to doing it?
Yeah.
So I think that's another part that may help make us
Yes.
relatively successful, is that we just don't leave it to spontaneity and the explosion of energy.
Right.
It's what we do with that energy.
Right. And a certain degree of predictability, this is something else from Hobbes, if whatever you establish as a form creates predictability, that's a good thing. Even in a world you want to change, right? Even if you want the revolution to come and everything to stop, predictability can be very assuring. Yeah, Donna.
I think a related question that I see popping up, and I think could probably pop up in different forms, is how much do we stick to one of the very basic principles of time trading, which is, one person's time is equal to another, because from every now and then I notice that somebody is posting something on the website, and offering to pay like 2 or 3 times the number of hours, and so like how important is it, and would that kind of corrupt, sort of act in the ways that money corrupts, kind of, and what do people think about that?
Right. Yeah, so if somebody is out of a sense of service is wanting to overpay, am I hearing you correctly?
Either that or just wanting to be sure to get somebody to do it, or...
Right. That's not the straight contract. So really, to understand this as a straight contract is a very smart thing, I think, because it'll create that longevity. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Thanks, Meg.